Hey everybody, it's Booksy. Today is Tuesday, January 4th, and I'm going to be talking about ATER, I'm going to be talking about AMC, and I'm going to talk a little bit about CHPT today. So today was a bit of a doozy. We started with a big old sell-off in the morning and kind of rose up in the afternoon. Since that time, I've been looking at a lot of different things, mainly because I don't find any particular region of AMC stock to be like the repeat region. And I know that a lot of folks have been talking a lot about January. Some other folks have talked about June. I've talked about both at different times, mostly June. And the reason for that is because I don't really like the January fractal very much. This is the January fractal. And by that, I mean like the pre-January fractal. I'm sorry, the 2020 fractal. Um, I don't like this very much because it's a little weird, right? And for a while, people kept they were telling me and they were telling other people that they believe that this particular region right here was in fact this region up here. And I had disagreed with that a while back. I said that I felt like this, if anything, if you were looking at the sequence from start, which would be right here, to finish, that this would line up with this. And I mapped it out. I have a screenshot, that I took, I don't know, a month or two ago. It was right before we were like coming into the head and shoulder region here, and I said I really felt like, or maybe it was right afterwards. I was like, I think that we're, if anything, this would have been the spring. But when I look at people's interpretations of this fractal, even the ones that agreed with me, people who said that, yeah, sure, like this is the spring. They were just basically taking a bars pattern of this region and saying that, oh, we're just going to go all the way down to like 19. And I'm like, no, that's not the way you should look at fractals. That doesn't make any sense. That was a completely different time frame. And I'm going to show you today why I think that it went to where it went in this region. And then we're going to look at a fractal together that is going to be very exciting. I'm not sure it's going to blow your mind, but it kind of blew my mind a little bit because I just hadn't thought about it in a while. And I'm going to do something a little different today. I'm going to try to walk us through a fractal together and show you how I look at them. Basically, I'm looking for key points, and then I use like zoom and enhance, right, to try to pinpoint different regions. So again, I understand there's a lot of people that would disagree and say that, no, Booksy, you're wrong, you're so wrong, this is this, this is this whole thing. But if that's the case, then how in the world do you reconcile this region and then this region? Then what you're doing is you're just saying, no, it's got to be this thing over here, right? That we had this is the dip, and then we had this long stretched out period. Look, I'm not saying that you were completely wrong, and I'm not saying that I was completely right. I wasn't. I stopped looking at this region a while ago because I just don't care. And I also didn't care about it because it's ugly. It's hard to read this, all right? And it's not because, again, I think that AMC can't repeat, quote unquote, certain time frames. It's more about the sequence for me. I think it repeats a sequence, T1, T2, T3. And then within that sequence, around the T3, you have multiple springs. So, that being said, every single one of these fractals has a spring. Every single one of them has a fourth spring, all right? The January to June fractal also had a fourth spring. Let's see if this loads, which is this spring right here. And in my more recent analysis, and this is an old chart, remember how I said my charts got all messed up? This was like an older chart. In my more recent analysis on this, where I did the pattern, and you can go check it out. I think I was even looking at it a video or two ago if you just want to pop in and see it. Or if you follow me on Twitter, I guess you could probably go through like old tweets or something. But I was saying that basically like this is a spring right here. Well, it's actually at the very, very bottom, this region. This is a spring right here. And then you've got, essentially, you've got like one more, I think it's right here, it's right here. I think it's right here. And then you've got these two, which are really not official springs, but I've been calling these 1, 2, 3, 4, and these are grouped together. I attested recently that I felt like we were actually tracking this region really well because we had this head and shoulder here. And this head and shoulder, the reason I was looking at this particular one to compare is because this looks very similar. Like we had almost one-to-one movements, and that makes it just a lot easier to sort of anticipate. I mean, you can see the similarities. I don't even have to like show you why I thought that. You get those really sharp, double liquidity tests. You get that spring, right? And you get the head and shoulder motion. And then we were going to look like we were going to do another spring. And what I actually think happened, and I know this is going to sound really weird, but I actually think this is it. I think that we had the spring and we had this really rapid iteration of this entire sequence right in this region, and then we sold off into the final spring. And I know that sounds a little crazy, but it's there. And I remember on the day I posted about it, I said that I thought that it looked really fast and something was a little off. Maybe we should just wait and see how the day goes. But it looked like the whole sequence had played out. Normally when that happens, you don't want to say, yeah, that's it, because oftentimes when the day plays out, you're like, oh, okay, it was just part of the sequence, right? Part of a bigger sequence. That didn't happen. Instead, we went down and we broke out like downward, right? Instead of upward. So at that point, I'm looking back and I'm like, well, we have one other spring number 4 to look at on the macro. And that is this spring number 4. And this spring number 4 is really a pretty large one. But again, it's a little bit difficult to interpret perhaps. And it's not one of these things that I'm going to like go to and be like, yeah, this is the best thing to look at. I still don't think it is. And if you look at this region right here, it doesn't seem to match very well with what comes before it. However, if you were to understand that this is a spring based on your knowledge of the way that they look and how they operate, what they're going after, then it wouldn't be that far-fetched to say that you probably could draw some comparisons from this region right here to this region right here, albeit it looks pretty ugly. And that means, yes, exactly what it sounds like, right? That this would basically match 1-to-1. That this very large region right here is actually the same as this right here, this tiny region. And before anyone cries foul, I've already sort of done a mini proof of this and talked about the 4 spikes over here on the major R1 fractal up here, and how they basically mimic this. And we're just going into the 4th spring. Well, this all started clicking with me today. This is the 4th spring on the macro. It's huge. It's huge. And it doesn't look a whole lot like either spring at a glance. Unless you understand, and this is the kicker, right? Unless you understand that this entire region right here is all part of that spring action, because you have the spring 1 through 4 in that region. And 1 through 4 can sometimes be very spread out, and then sometimes they're not spread out at all. But they're always there. And so looking at this, then what I decided to do was go to some other charts today and check out what they've been doing. Now, ATER had started tracking AMC very recently in the last month of the year. And so I was like, well, they've been tracking really well. I mean, it's not that difficult to see it. I did a video on the ATER and AMC not too long ago, maybe even, was it yesterday? I think it was before then. I think it was Friday. But this is the basic gist of it, is that you have the springs all present there, and they're also playing out. Actually, this one's much larger. That's not this spring. I got to zoom out a bit. You can see that this is the spring, right? You get this sort of a peak and then a big old valley, and then on the right side of the valley is the run up. And on either side, you have these sort of like two towers, right, on either end. And that looks very similar to what we see here as well. Okay. Now, there's another place where you see those kind of two towers, and that is at the end of the spring action. And this has me very curious because I've been watching these stocks for a long time, and I've seen this like a lot. I've seen this pattern a lot, and I guess I just didn't really, I don't say I didn't notice it. I've noticed it. It's more like in sequence, what this is that T3, but then it falls out into the final spring action. So looking at it that way, that doesn't really tell you a whole lot about this pattern. But if you just kind of look at the shape of it and you consider what's going on here, and then we've seen it elsewhere, like this is a squashed almost version of it, but it's very similar, right? And that's because it looks a lot like what we see on this particular region, like the T2 region tends to look a little bit like this. So we kind of have an idea of what they might be doing, like stop loss testing, perhaps, shaking people out in the upper range and like making people scared or nervous it's going to drop, right? And then of course it does drop, but only when it's in a certain spot, right? So my big thing today was that I went to ChargePoint, and I know you've probably never seen this chart, but if you're not, unless you're in it, ChargePoint does solar stuff and electric car stuff. Mostly electric stuff, like charging stations. And this is another one of our AMC copy charts. It's definitely trading the same way. I'm not going to do a back and forth comparison, but you can see, I mean, it's the same, basically the same chart. The difference is that this actually started in November of 2020. So it started earlier, had a longer run, and then it started syncing up recently. And likewise, you get the same spring action here. And to some degree here. Though this one's much smaller. So when I was looking at this on ChargePoint, I went over to the beginning of this chart. Excuse me. And I found that this region actually looks a lot like just a major spring action. You know, it looks very similar. You've got the two towers, right, with the valley in between, and then this is a lower region. It also looks a lot like the June one, right? The June run fractal. This right here. I mean, almost a dead ringer. So clearly this algo is being used on multiple stocks by a major player. You see that? But this is kind of something that clicked in my brain. I was looking at and this is what I'm going to get into today. I was looking at the VPVR. So this is your indicator if you want to check it out. You know, there's some different ways to customize this thing. What we're really just seeing is like buying pressure and selling pressure ultimately. And we're really talking about liquidity zones. The visible range, all right, is what it's called. I'm sorry, I think I just said VPVR. I don't want people to be like confused what that is. If you look at ChargePoint and you look in the very beginning of the stock, you can see that there's a liquidity gap in this particular region. And this is important. And I'm going to tell you why this particular discovery is important in just a second. Okay. Because I think this is how we're going to understand the price action of this stock and of AMC. So you can see that the liquidity gap got a little bit of action down here. It's still lower than the regions above it, but you know, we can kind of come like halfway. But if you look at this specifically, like just here, look how low it is in this range. And let's just say that you didn't want to go much lower because you touched already this major trend line. You already touched it, right? You bounced really hard and then you came back down. You went below the 786 retracement, which I'm retracing from the bottom. In this case, the bottom of this initial move. And I'm finding that it seems to set up right above it when it comes back up. Like it went down below it, pushed down hard, lots of volume to do that, and then came out. And then I went to ATER and did the same thing. I looked at ATER's chart. Oh, I'm going to use this one. And in ATER's chart, if you check out this particular spring right here, I mean, there's just nothing here. Like this zone down here is really unexplored. And if you were to go to like the all-time chart, we're not going to do that necessarily all the whole way, but we'll go to like the 2 hour for just a second so you can see it. Again, this region is pretty weak in terms of how much price exploration has actually happened, right? Except for back here during COVID, which would have been accumulation, right? And take a look at this fractal over here. And tell me that doesn't look kind of familiar. Look at that final push down. All right, but after COVID, if you check it out, there's just not much action going on down there. Now, if you look at the current range, you can see that, yeah, like back in August, it got quite a bit of accumulation that happened in this region. But a lot of it's been on the way down, and a lot of it's been selling as well. So you have a little bit of both. Okay, so let's zoom back in. Let's take a look. Oopsie. Yeah, so this lower region, if you're looking at where does the volume kind of drop off, this lower region is that region. There's just nothing here under about $4.15. It did a liquidity test down there before with an earlier spring iteration. So when you look at where the next spring goes, it goes into that very region and it explores it more. Okay. And then right here, what happened today, let's get back into the like earlier or smaller time frame, 15-minute. What happened today was kind of interesting. If you check out where, this is where, by the way, this is where like the shorts that get in here, who think this thing is going to fall to zero, this is where they got in, right? Because they're thinking, oh, it's over, and then they're waiting it out. They're loading up more, right, on their average, and then this doesn't come right back down, and they might be thinking, well, it should come down, right? And look at the gap here. Hey, let me go back again. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Here, all right, this zone right here, this is a gap, right? And there is a sense that it tried to go down into there today, and it didn't take. With AMC, we pushed down into this region that previously had almost no action, and now we've had a bunch of action in this lower region. And we're looking to test above us now because, yeah, there is a slight gap down here, and we may even see a drop in the morning. I'll get to that in a minute. I'm not convinced that needs to happen, but it's a possibility. And again, I'll tell you why. But this right here is kind of what we're looking at. Like there's upside. All right, we're going to explore up here now. You can look above us. Now, let's look at, okay, AMC. Why is it going to this particular region? And what is there, like what's similar between this and the other charts I was talking about today? Well, if you look at the region that it's actually exploring right now, right? It's this region that's been largely untested. We've just kind of passed through it. And specifically, it was this run up right here, right? And this run up, there we go. I just wanted to see all of that. This run up right here, okay, is the push out of this larger spring. If you look at charge point, and you go back and you see like, well, where was it going? Well, it's going to test this region again. If you're looking at where those springs happen, they happen like according to previous run-ups, like these bars that just printed like super fast, right? And going back and you're exploring that range. And the same thing with ATER. We just saw it. And let's look at AMC. And let's do the same thing for, I'm going to use this right here. And let's just do the same thing for January. And let's look at January. Okay. So back in January, you can see that the majority of the price trading happened in this upper region. And though there were some gaps in the lower region, arguably you could just say this whole region is really like, this lowest region is the least explored region. It bounced out of here, and it as it's printing, it's still not really getting back there. Here we saw some action finally, right? But look at where we are by the time we get to the spring. Oh, I don't want to spoil it. Oh no, I messed it up. All right, so when we get to the spring, where do we want to go from here? Well, if you're going to go back down to a region, what region are you going to go to? You're not going to go up, right? You don't want to run yet. You have barely any room anyways to maneuver up here. So you're going to go down. You're going to pass through this region really quickly, all right? You're going to walk it down through this higher liquidity zone, and you're going to try to get to this lower region. And then look what happens when they get to the lower region. There it is. Suddenly, this eclipses everything and becomes like the highest bought region. Well, highest traded region. It's amazing, right? And this is before the thing ran up. So at this point, with where we came down, all right, we're looking at this region overhead as the last kind of unexplored region in our current territory. And this is why maybe other people are saying, oh no, we got to go down through 2250. I'm not so sure about that. Okay. We've looked at 3 different stocks today, and every single one of them has had their second spring, or this fourth spring, I'm sorry, in a different location. Second bigger spring, right? Spring. I'm not convinced that just because you can take a bars pattern and put it down here, that it needs to go. It just doesn't make any sense. But I'm about to do something else, and I think it's going to maybe sway your mind a bit. So for one, this is one proof that there's a liquidity zone down here for this spring action to take place in, and that it's not going further right this second. Okay. And then 2, that this fractal is one and the same. This larger fractal right here is the same as this fractal right here. It is the spring fractal. And looking at that, 2 towers that I've been talking about, you can see it right here. This is the valley, right? You have the sell-off and the rise. It's just happening on this huge macro scale. And so what I want to do is just walk you through it. We're going to look at both fractals, and I guess it was supposed to be on this chart. I'm going to do a comparison between the 2. And that's where we're going to basically end the video today, because when we get to the end here, it's pretty exciting. Okay. And there's probably going to be a couple of times where I'm going to need to zoom in a little bit on this once we get to like this time frame over here. So by the way, the 786 here is if you draw it from, I don't want to just gloss over that. That's pretty important. That 786 is drawn from the base of the T3. All right, the base of this move right here. You can't see it because my chart's not loading. There it is. To the top of the range. So this is a possible 786, and it did respect it on the way up. All right. Oh, and by the way, if you do a fib from the bottom to the top here, and we're kind of in the middle of the 618 right now, just FYI. And look at where the 786 is, the 22.5. That was that zone that they couldn't push through except for on that after hours push. All right, now let's go into the side by side and then let's walk through it together. So this is a walkthrough of a macro spring compared to a micro spring, but this is the best micro spring I think we've had ever because it's part of the macro spring. And every other micro spring looks kind of different. Most of them have some similarities, but they all have these kind of slight oddities to them. So I don't want to belay the point anymore. So let's just get started. Basically, you have this sort of a catch action that happens here, and then you get the nice push down and a run up. We know that this run up was that iterative fractal, right? But this push down is pretty gnarly. It's pretty crazy looking. And I remember when I was charting this particular region that this looked like this sort of a sequence. And so my thought is that the after hours action is actually the push down, and then this is your run up. So whether or not that's like a stop loss or something like that, a stop loss hunt, I don't know. The point is if you start tracking from there, it's 1-to-1. I think that's where we need to start. So we're going to look at the 5 minute. It loads. Guess I could have went with the 15, but I like the 5, so we're gonna do that. I'm gonna try not to move around too much, but I need to a little bit. So when you move up here, this is basically like a really awkward looking T1 fractal where you have like the little horns, or you could even think about this as a T2 because you do get that compression down, just like you do over here. And if you're looking at this particular fractal, we see that happen right here, right? And then it's harder to see over here. I don't really think this really counts as much. But if you look at the particular push down and then up and then down here, that's S curve, it's happening right here. So I do believe that this is 1-to-1. And then you get started, you have the head and shoulder pattern with the drop down, head and shoulder pattern with the drop down. You get some catches along the way. You get to the bottom of the sequence. This is like a boxy area, and it's a little difficult to read. If you're doing fractal analysis and you're finding it just really hard to sort of see what you want to see, I often will switch over to one of the ones that has the Heikanashi. I just think it's easier to read sometimes. So if you get kind of stuck, you should always have at least one that's sort of set up that way. These are like flip-flopped, aren't they? Yeah, okay. They reduce a lot of the clutter and the noise of the chart, which helps you to see the fractals better, in my opinion, the shapes. So let's do that. All right. Okay, so at this point, what we're trying to look at is this very, very small region and compare it to this region right here. A lot of times, the fractal will kind of rise or fall, and you have to be aware of that because sometimes these fractals, they don't always, like, they don't track directionally the same way every single time, but they're usually pretty similar. So they won't always necessarily be it won't always be a rising fractal just because. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. In this case, this is kind of a rising fractal, and this is kind of a rising fractal. You do get that little two-tower formation right here in the middle, and you can kind of see, there's the little twin peaks over here. There's your push down and up, down and up. We're moving into this fractal right here, which would be basically like a tiny version of a T3 fractal, okay, which is the push down, and then you get a nice swing up. Now, this swing up, if you notice, and this kind of blows my mind. Well, let's not ruin it. Let's just wait. I'm gonna come back to this box in a second. You can kind of already see it, so it doesn't matter. So this is the run up. This is your T1. The T1 is hard to sometimes pick apart on these, but you see how this is like rounded? I thought that was so peculiar when I saw it round that way, because usually it's not that wide. And then I was like, that's the T2. You know, that's the start of the T2. The T1 wasn't actually the highest point, which is very unusual. The T2 is actually the highest point. And in this case, it's the same. Here's the T1, and then here's the T2 start. And from there, things get a little bit choppy in this region. It could be very difficult to sort of see and interpret. I think that at this point, it may be wise to switch this one to the 1 minute and just get nitty gritty on it. And it's going to take a minute for us to get back to where we were. I'm going to go ahead and recenter this one. All right, and then we're going to go over to wherever we are. Once it loads, there we go. Okay. All right, so let's check out this region. Should look pretty similar because it's the same. Spoiler alert. This particular part, I got a little confused because this looks really cluttered, but there's some signposts. And if you're ever stuck in a fractal sequence and you're wondering like, well, what do I look at bottoms and tops, look at really major moves. So this is clearly like the other side of this valley here. And this does look like this particular bounce. When you move up this way, things are a little confusing. There's a little bit of a plateau, right? Push down and then back up. And if you go all the way up, you can see this does look a little bit like a head and shoulder. Kind of ugly. That's sort of what we saw in this region. And then from there, you know, we're going up, moving this direction. I'm actually saying down, but really it's up. I'm going backwards, right? Down, up. This would be up. This is that 3-point top, down. Okay, up. And this is kind of like the ledge that we're seeing here, the final ledge. See that? So if that's the case, and I think that it is, then on the other side of this fractal, I mean, need I say more? I don't, I mean, in this case, it's like, it's almost embarrassing how similar these are. This is like a really, really easy one to pick out. You have the 3-point top, all right? Whether it's this or this, it doesn't really matter. These could just be like the walk up. This particular section, noise, a lot of noise. But it's this move and then this move that really matter. And you have that really, see that rapid, like, jagged edge on top? We got the same thing here in this region. And so that means that we're hitting the bottom right now, and what follows is a move up. There's nothing else. It's kind of like a hit the brakes move. And if you were happened to be following on the Twitter today, then you would have seen that I actually posted about that the January move. Where is it? Be this one. I say, man, it looks a lot like the January move. This is the bottom of the January, or the pre-January, I should say. I keep saying the January move, but I'm talking about pre-January. This is the bottom of that particular move, and this is our bottom right now. Now, the question I have is, do we require another dip? And that I cannot answer with 100% certainty. There is a clear pattern here where this walks up and drops back to the bottom, walks down the bottom. all right, and then starts moving back up towards the top of the range. It does get rejected. It does have quite a hard rejection here as well. In our current time, one thing that's a little concerning is that if you look down here, the volume pickup here is pretty immense, and then it flattens really bad. Our volume pickup is really only immense in this region. And I'm not sure exactly what that means, but it could mean that we need to have this dip right here, which is probably the end of another sequence, could be more severe. Or this particular dip could end up being a little more severe as well. It's a possibility. Another possibility is that you see how this does have that drop down, and it definitely matches. It doesn't necessarily look really convincing unless you like really flatten this thing as this right here, but it could. I think it's a pretty safe assumption to say that's the same drop down, because it's really obvious, and I think that normally if you can't read it, you could be like, I don't know, but if it's super obvious, then just take it. So I kind of think that's what it is. That being said, when we were looking at this particular thing, I was like, well, where did that spring go? Where did it need to go to? And our spring, this spring, where did it need to go to? Well, it went to this previous region, right, on the other side of the valley. So remember I talked about how this drops down, and then this is where that spring happens, and then we push up. Look where we are right now. We drop down. We're exploring the region where we pushed up on the other side of the valley. We're exactly where we're supposed to be for that push up. This is not a time frame. This is a spring fractal. And arguably, this is the fractal that occurs every time we see a tiny little spring appear on this stock. If that's the case, then the expectation could be, doesn't have to happen, but it could be, that this is it. We don't need to move down again. If we did move down, I would say it would be probably pretty minor. Or it would be just a really quick blip down to maybe this 24 level. Can't remember exactly where I got this from. I think it was the touch point from several, like from earlier on in the stock. There's like 2 other touch points, and this is like the 3rd touch point. Let's just look. Trying to guess. Yeah, and then this spring actually went down to the 786. So if we were going to get a touch point there, I think it would be just down to like 2465. So originally I thought, well, max pain is $28, so they're just going to walk it up. But now I'm kind of thinking that, I don't know, maybe they will like do this sort of a drop down thing, and maybe it'll be really severe. And then we'll kind of go sideways some more, and then we'll get our official final part of that, and we'll move out. But I kind of think, looking at what we saw before, it may or may not be kind of done, and this would be where we would form a other part of the shoulder. So this was sort of my initial idea. This is still on the table. If you're looking at what happened over here, it just kind of moved up and formed the shoulder, like it doesn't seem to have any other like special action here. It's very quick. When it kind of got to the region it wanted to get to, it just finished. And I don't know if this is where they say, hey, forget max pain, and they go up to our 22 range. There's more to talk about there later, maybe when it happens. But at some point, they're going to start using that options chain. They're going to start, forcing like, gamma hedging and all that. I mean, it's going to be or delta hedging. And then, we're going to get like we're going to get that squeeze that we're looking for, that next move. And this is if this is 1, then this would be 2, and then the next one would be 3, which means that the third wave is usually the biggest if it ends up being an Elliott wave, right? I could see it easily moving us back to maybe 37 range, and then the fifth wave moves us up back to like 40, 45. That would be like significant. But I genuinely think that it's very close. I think that looking at the fractals today, it's pretty clear. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to y'all later.